Hello fellow app music makers, Jay here from App Music Tutorials, and I've got another great tutorial in store for you today. In this video we're going to focus on advanced drum sequencer tactics that will take your Zenbeats sequencer skills to the next level. If you haven't yet learned the basics of the Zenbeats sequencer, feel free to click the card coming up right about now for a great introduction to programming beats in Zenbeats. A lot of people are under the impression the Zenbeats sequencer is just a drum machine. And that's the way it's been positioned by a lot of people who have approached this topic. In this video we're going to learn that the Zenbeats sequencer is way more than just a drum machine. So the topics we're going to cover are how to modify an existing drum kit to create a custom kit, how to add a new kit from scratch, and add some built-in Zenbeats sounds, and then also incorporate some third-party sounds into the drum sequencer. We'll talk about adding bars to lengthen a pattern, why you'd want to do that, what the benefits are, and then how it's done. And then editing drum parts using the MIDI editor. We'll also take a look at some basic automation and applying effects, and get a good look at the drum inspector, which is a great little tool we use to shape our drum sounds. This is the first video, by the way, that I have a video table of contents for, so if you want to jump to a specific topic, just go down to the description and click a timestamp and it'll jump you right to that section. Here I have an open project I created using the Hip Hop Studio track template, which I've called Advanced Drum Sequencer Tactics, and I am currently in Loop Builder view. I'm going to remove the samples that are already out here because I'm not going to use them, so I can just click and use my delete key on my keyboard, or I can long press or right click and use the delete option. But I'm clearing out these sequences here. And now I've got a fresh, clean slate. So now I actually want to get into the sequencer, and at this point, if I double click on the track icon, I can't get in there. And so that's because we actually have to go into the sequencer with the intent of building a loop, and we do that by activating the cell by double clicking. You can see that the status, the color of the cell changed. And now if I double click in the cell, or if I double click on the track icon, it'll pull up the sequencer. So one way to create a custom drum kit is to use an existing drum kit and build from that. So here I have the classic Boom demo kit, and these are some of the basic sounds you would expect to hear in this type of kit. So in my opinion, I'm not really too keen, it's just my own personal taste, I'm not really too keen on this second snare hit. So I'm going to replace that with another sound. And to do that I can long press or right click. And you'll get this context menu, which has a lot of different options. And we've already touched on a lot of these, by the way, in previous videos. But I'm going to change the sound. And I have my sound picker, and all of them are going to be all of the different Zenbeats libraries that I have access to. All the different presets, sounds, and so forth. And I'm looking at all of them. And I can narrow things down. Like if I wanted to just look at the snares, I can just choose snares from the options here, and I'm just going to replace this with a different snare. I like that one. So I'll click the plus button and it'll swap out that demo 808 for the DP demo snare 18. Alright, so let's suppose I like the other sounds but I want to incorporate more sounds. I can go down to the bottom and click the plus button, and here let's say I want to add some type of special effect. I'm just going to click on the effects option. You saw me do that. And I can audition these sounds. I actually like this. This is kind of neat. I'm going to click on that and it'll add that basstron element, that sound, to my sequencer. Now once I'm satisfied that I have all the different pieces of my puzzle put together, I'm going to want to save this as a custom drum kit, and to do that I want to click on the drum kit icon and choose Save Drum Kit As. And I'm just going to let this be called Classic Boom Demo Kit J1. And I'm going to click OK. And now there is my custom kit in a list. Now if I want to recall that later on, what I can do is navigate out to the kits where they're located. I just click on the name here of any kit that happens to be loaded. And I can go to the category and change that to user, and then here are the different user kits that I've got out here. So let me go ahead and put that back to all, and let me close that up. And so that's how we can build a kit using an existing kit and building from that. If you'd like to build a kit from scratch, what we have to do in that case is click on the little drum icon to the left again and choose New Drum Kit. And then we get a clean slate here. So I'm going to pull in some drum sounds that I'd like to hear as part of this kit. I'm going to click the plus button, and I'm going to go to my categories and click on the search icon here, the little magnifying glass, spyglass, whatever. And I'm going to type in here 12-bit. Got a lot of sounds categorized as 12-bit, and I'm going to actually go to the all category. And there we go. So I'm going to grab out the 12-bit kick too. I like this kick. So I'm going to just click on the plus button to add it. And there we go. So now to add another sound, I need to click the plus button. And I'm going to choose the 12-bit CH01, which is kind of like a hi-hat. And I'll pull that out. Now, I'm not going to do it the same way I just did it, because the way I just clicked on the plus button to add a piece, in my opinion, is inefficient. So what I'm going to do is, rather than clicking, I'll click and drag the sound out. And see how it just lands there, and the panel is still open. I can move on to the next item I want to grab. So there are a few other things I want to add to this kit, which are not in the Zenbeats menu. They're actual third-party loops and samples I have available on my hard drive somewhere. So I'm going to click on the magnifying glass up here to get back to my list, my dropped list. And from the drop down, I'm going to choose user, and that's going to let me search my hard drives for sounds. And I'm going to click on the folder to get started with that. Go ahead and get to where I need to be here. Drum sugar. There's some really neat blues guitar riffs here. And I think that'll sound really cool. So I'm going to click on the folder. And again, I'm not going to just click it. I'm going to click and drag and pull that out. Now, there are a couple of other sound effects I'm going to pull out here as well. Crash with glass, and distortion squiggly. And now I've got all my kit pieces, all my sounds that I'm going to be using. So now I want to save that. I want to make sure that once I've got my kit assembled, I save it. One thing I might want to do first, though, or next, it depends on your workflow, is I might just want to rearrange some of these things. I do have a bass drum here, and then a bass drum up here, and then between them I've got this little shaker sounding thing. So I want to move the bass drums together so that they're in a logical order. So to do that, I can just either long press or right click and just move that up the stack. And so there I've just put the bass drums together, followed by my little shaker, followed by my snare. And I can reorder these in any way I need to make sense to me. So let's save that by clicking the drum kit icon and choose Save Drum Kit As. I'm going to call this ADST for Advanced Drum Sequencer Tactics, and click OK. And there's my kit. So now I can start building my beat, and I'm just going to start putting my bass hits out here. A couple snare hits. I'm going to get some 16th notes going for this hi-hat. And if you've seen previous videos, you know how this is done. I basically click into a cell and then I start to drag to the right, and then it starts to plug in. As I drag to the right, it'll have different patterns it will plug in. Otherwise, of course, I can just click on, turn on and off the different beats I want to be heard. But that's my pattern so far, and let's take a listen. All right, I am going to save my work I've done so far, just clicking on the name of the project, or of the sequence, I should say. And so here, I'm going to start to work with some other things as well. I want to move this hi-hat down to this other AD hat so that they're both kind of together again in the logical order. I would have moved it earlier had I recognized that that was not in the right order. So let me go ahead and quickly do that. There we go. So here I am going to put in some additional hat hits using this AD hat sound. And I'm going to have that occur on every downbeat. So every quarter beat, basically. Now, in my opinion, it's hard to differentiate the different sounds between the AD hat hit and the other hat hit. So I'm going to stop the playback and I'm going to remove these hits that overlap. And another thing is it makes logical sense to do this because normally when you're playing the hi-hats as a drummer, you're not hitting two hi-hats simultaneously, you're hitting them sequentially. So I'm taking these out just to demonstrate that, yes, you can hear the difference at this point. So that's one way to deal with this overlapping beat. I'm going to put all these back because we'll talk about another way to handle that situation in a few minutes here. Now let's incorporate the blues guitar sample. So let me just go ahead and have that be triggered on the very first note. All right, and let's suppose I want to actually use my crash with glass, and I want to have that happen along with the AD hi-hat, the last AD hi-hat in my pattern here. And then I also have this other extremely ugly, menacing sound, and I won't bring that into this until I can tame the sound a little bit. And to do that, we're just going to open up the drum inspector, and that's accessed by the little arrow icon on the lower left. And so the drum inspector allows me to independently control parameters for every single sound, aka kit piece, which is really, really cool. And as I go between the various sounds, you can see the waveforms for those sounds appearing. And so that's great. I can see the waveform, but there's actually a practical application for that waveform, and that's to trim it very quickly in this view. Now, I wish that there was a way to get a larger view, Roland, of this waveform. So, I mean, it's nice that it's here, and I'll show everybody how to use this, but I think it'd be better if there was a larger image, like an expanded view maybe that popped out or something. At any rate, the reason I mention this right away is because I want to tame this squiggly distortion, this ugly thing. I'm going to highlight that. I'm going to pull the gain way down. And then we'll just listen to this. I'm just going to place this here. It's long, it's nasty, it's gritty, it's ugly. Okay, but I like that sound. I just don't want the entire 18 seconds there to play back. I want a little piece of that. So the way that you actually do this is in the waveform area, I can determine what the length of that's going to end up being. So I can either drag in from the start point or the end point to shorten things down. Let me show you how that works. and let me also solo the track. So this is a little bit shorter. Again, certainly not shorten up, so I'm going to shorten that way down. I'll try that again. And by manipulating the start and end points, you can find a little sweet spot, and usually more than one sweet spot. You can generally find a decent sound, by shortening it up, that you can use that will make sense rhythmically within the context of your pattern. So I'm going to leave that as it is with that very short part of that sequence. Now I'm also going to take a look at the Crash with Glass just to show you a couple things here. I'm going to solo this track. I'll just take a listen. And that's the full length of the actual part here. But when you play it back, you're going to hear that it's a little bit off. Okay, so let me turn that down just a tad. And I'll play this back. And let me play it back with the rest of the sequence. And I'm going to mute the ugly sound for now. If I mute the blues guitar part, you'll be able to hear even further how offbeat that part is. So we hear that that is off a little bit. It's coming in a little late. The broken glass crash sound is coming in just a tad after the beat. And if I take a look at the actual waveform, it's very small. You can barely see this up here. But there's a delay there. There's like a little tail on the front end where there's no sound. And I'm going to drag that in. Get rid of that little tail. And now if I play this back, it should be in sync with the rest of the beat. Now, it may be that I don't want the entire sample. Maybe I want to shore that up and not hear any after clinking. Still hear it a little bit. Let me put that back a tiny bit, cut that off a little bit. So I'm hoping you can tell the difference there, that there is a way to manipulate these samples very quickly, very easily in what's called the drum inspector, which is the part over here now. So now I want to go ahead and work with the blues guitar riff here. I'm going to go to that track, unmute it. And I don't think I want the entire riff playing through. Kind of like I didn't want the entire distortion squiggly thing to play through. It was just annoying. Let me unmute that one as well. There we go. So let me play this with the blues guitar. Let me play the pattern through. I like that. So there, we've shaved down our samples that we imported from third party to make them correspond or conform to the rhythm of our pattern. And it's really a nice way to add interest and to add additional layers to your sound that will actually make a huge difference in the value of your musical productions. So I'm hoping that you're seeing at this point that this is not just a drum machine, it's more of a sound machine. We're using these cells as an opportunity to trigger whatever sound we want, whether it's going to be a stab, a one shot, a loop, a sound effect, a sound bite, an important speech segment, whatever you want to incorporate, you can do it here in the context of the sequencer. It's just really a great way to utilize this tool. So, in my opinion, and let's just listen to this one more time. I like that rhythm. I like all the elements. But to me, this one bar sequence seems a little crowded. So there's just, in my opinion, for my own taste, there's too much going on in this one measure, this one bar. So this is where you might decide to open things up a bit and give your sequence, your pattern, some breathing room by adding additional measures, additional bars, so you can spread out your sounds. So again, it allows you to kind of spread out your sounds, spread certain sounds out, helping your sequence kind of evolve or build over time, which is really great. Let's go ahead and make this longer. Now, if you've watched these videos in the past, my other videos, then you probably already understand why the default pattern size is 1 bar. So for those of you who aren't quite sure, if I go up to the transport controls and expand that out, this is part of my grid options. So here is that new pattern size. The default's 1 bar, and that's generally fine. I can always change the pattern size at the pattern level, which is what we're going to take a look at next. So here, what I need to do to add a bar is go to this little 4 square button on the upper left. And here we can see the pattern size, and we can adjust that. So notice that Zenbeats allows you to create patterns up to 8 bars in length. And for most EDM producers and beat makers, this is going to be plenty. However, for some, this limitation can be an issue. The limitation of the 8 measure loop in the sequencer. So there is a way around that. If you want to learn more about overcoming the 8 bar sequencer limitation in Zenbeats, you can click on the card that's about to display right here to learn more about that. So from the drop down, I'm going to choose 2 bars. I'll click away. And then you're going to notice at the very bottom of the screen, a few buttons have appeared. And so I've got this follow button activated, and I have a 1 and a 2. And let's turn off follow for now. And what this 1 and 2 is it represents the first page, the first bar of the sequencer, and then the second page or second bar of the sequencer. So that's how I can go through. So basically I've doubled this beat in essence by expanding it from 1 bar to 2. When you do that, it basically copies the pattern down. And now I can make some fine adjustments if I want to. Now I can kind of spread things out over time. So let me do that. I'm going to go ahead and just remove this squiggly distortion option there. And then I'm going to move to the second page here. And I think I'm going to leave that just as it is. That sounds tight. So another way to work with your sequences is using the MIDI editor. And to access the MIDI editor, it's this button off to the right, kind of across from the close button. If I click on that, you'll see a screen that looks similar, but it is different. And here we can use the editing functions to move things around a few different ways. We can use the editing tools. We can use the options in the drum inspector to do a few operations, but really predominantly what I like this view for is the fact I can see across the entire sequence. I'm not just limited to a page at a time looking at measure after measure after measure. I'm looking at the whole 9 yards right here on screen. And as I said, I can move things around. I can click on an item and move it around if I need to. Very easily, it locks to the 16th note interval here, that note, and I can go up to the editing tools area and just choose the delete trash can, and that will delete, in this case, that hit. Let me undo that and put that back. And by the way, everybody, if you make mistakes in this loop builder view in the drum sequencer, the undo works phenomenally well. I've recovered all kinds of mistakes I've made just by clicking undo. Timeline view undo still needs some work, but in this view, undo works splendidly. So other things you can do here is you can do like multi-selects for deleting purposes. You just kind of hold and drag and it creates that little box. Now you can see I've got a multi-select here. I can copy notes, I can paste notes, I can do all kinds of things here. I'm not going to go into that because you can play around with that stuff on your own. What I want to also mention, though, is that besides our ability to just graphically drag things around and manipulate the data using our tools, we also have this section over here, and this is part of that drum inspector, and this is more or less, if you want to call it this, a MIDI inspector. Now notice that everything is grayed out here. There's really nothing we can do until we select a note. So let me select a note and show you how this works. The buttons above here, left, right, up, and down, are going to allow us to move that note over a 16th note increment. Back, forth, move it down, up, down, put it back. So this is a way to move things around without actually having to, click or tap and drag it, which is really, for me, really hard to do on a phone. So I really prefer using the options to the left here to move things around. Now, in addition to being able to use these buttons, which move you over a whole 16th note, if you will, I also have this little move dial, if you will. And this is really cool. Now, let me zoom in a bit. So the move dial allows us to move whatever note or notes are selected. If I want to do a multi-select for notes, by the way, I can just hold down my control key on my PC and get a multi-select. Another way to get a multi-select is to choose the multi-tool here. So just to let you know, there's a couple ways to do that. Once you've selected your items, your notes or whatever, you can move things around in very small, and notice you can even move it backwards, kind of off the screen. But what this does, and why you would even do this, not only to just line up your notes with the beats, let's say you've played something in and you're way off and you want to move things around to adjust it so that things are locked in time. That's an obvious reason. But another reason that people might want to use this move function to be able to really take small increments of movement is it allows you to introduce a human feel to your drums. Currently with our drum sequencer, every single note is hit at the exact same time, at the exact same velocity, using the exact same sound. Everything's the same. Okay, so it sounds like a machine, right? And the goal in a lot of cases is to take our drum machine grooves and to give them more of a human feel. So this is one of the ways you do that. You can, move things either behind or ahead of the beat just slightly. It sounds less like a computer, less like a machine. So that is one way that I've really successfully used this, is to humanize the feel of rhythm patterns. And so again, I can select any number of notes, either using the select tool or I've got my control key. I can select different notes. Let's suppose I wanted to just move this note, this note, this note, and this note a little bit ahead. Again, once I've selected them, I use the move tool, and they're a tiny bit ahead. Now maybe I want to take maybe just a couple of these hits and put them behind a little bit. Just a tiny bit behind the groove. And as you play this back, once you start monkeying with it for a bit, so let me go ahead and talk about a few more things here. Another way to give your beats a more human feel is to change how loud or how softly a note is going to be played. And that's referred to as velocity. So notice that over here, there's a little velocity dial. So again, what I do is I select specific notes that I want to change how hard or how soft that note is played, and I can go ahead and adjust the velocity that way. Now when I adjust the velocity, notice that the notes that are selected, the softer the note is apparently hit, the more opaque or transparent, the darker it gets. Now the harder the note is hit, it gets more of a very bright, solid color. So that's just something to notice here. And there are some other things here you can use as well. Now quantize, I use quantize on record, so I rarely have to use this. But again, quantize is where you want to snap things to a particular interval within the context of your sequence. You can do that using quantize. And Roland's got a great video out on their site about quantize. Now the start and end options, this is really neat too, because this is a way to select notes and give them a different starting point and ending point. Again, another way to stagger the notes, make them not all uniform so that they sound more human in nature. Okay, a couple more tricks here as far as humanizing rhythms. Let's go back to the sequencer by clicking on the button on the upper right. And here, notice that we have a drum inspector. So we haven't really gotten into this yet, but I want to talk about this because it's super important. So in addition to being able to see the waveform here, this drum inspector also has a menu from the drop down here. There's a cog there. And this is the same menu you get when you either long press or right click in various areas. So it's the same menu, but you can also access it there. We have another option here that says stretch mode. And stretch mode has a lot to do with how the sample is processed when you change the pitch of the sample. Now there are two options. One is smart, one is vinyl. Smart mode, when you change the pitch of an item, let me just go down to the hi-hats here, and I'll use this as an example. Let me solo this. And you'll be able to hear as I change the pitch, the tuning here, it gets higher as I go clockwise. As I go counterclockwise from 12 o'clock, it gets lower. To go back to 0, you can either double tap or double click. When I change the tune like that, it only affects the pitch of the note. There's nothing else that occurs. There's no artifacting or anything. There's no shortening of the note of the sample. There's no lengthening of the sample as a result of the time stretch function. It's really neat. It's very clean. Now, the other option is the vinyl option. And when I use vinyl, what happens is when I shift the pitch higher, what it actually does is it shrinks down, it shortens the length of time that the sample plays. So hopefully you'll notice this here. Maybe not so much, but right, so you can hear. With the other mode, I was able to shift the pitch high, and it didn't lose, it didn't truncate, it didn't change the length of the sample. What you can hear is clearly happening here. Now it's the same the other way, and here if I turn it to the opposite spectrum, it actually is stretching out the sample and making it almost play out in slow-mo, if you will. So, you know, whatever option you like as far as time stretch you'll use, but I prefer the smart time stretch. Now we also have low cut and high cut filters again, and we have this inspector for every sound, so we can manipulate and shape everything. So here's low cut's not going to do much on a hi-hat, so we won't really hear much of a difference here. But if I increase or start to modify the high cut, right away you can hear the difference. Okay, so obviously we have pan over here. You can pan, you know, in the stereo field either left or right, or I'll leave it at the center. Now, something I almost missed here is you can also change the direction of the sample as well. So right next to the stretch mode, there's this directional option, and it's currently playing the sound forward from my hi-hat. But if I change that, now all of those notes are playing the hi-hat in reverse. So that's an option you've got. And of course, we also have effects here, which we'll cover momentarily. Now, the last thing I want to cover before we head into like automation and effects is the choke option. So if you recall earlier, I mentioned that, you know, if we have two hi-hats playing at the exact same time, let me go ahead and unsolo that. If we have these hats that are different tones playing simultaneously, they kind of blend together and you kind of lose one into the other. It's hard to make the distinction between sounds, but if you were to delete overlapping notes, then you would definitely be able to hear then the distinct difference. So let me just solo this and the next track here. And we'll play this back to show you. So we've covered that. We kind of know how that works. Now there's an option though that will automate this for us, and this is called choke. So let me put these hits back. All right, so how do we automate that function? Well, we use something called choke. And so you can create something called a choke group. And what will happen, let me just show you how this is done. For the hi-hats, I'm going to grab the choke. That's going to be part of a choke group. And the lower hi-hat sound as well, I'm going to make part of the choke group. Now, the way this works is that when you have a choke group, the instrument or the sound underneath takes priority. So rather than these notes sounding on the track above at the same time with the notes below, these red notes are going to take priority because of where they are. They're underneath. They're the lower track, if you will, in the choke group. So to show you how this works, let's go ahead and play this back. And so it works just as expected. Again, we can always remove those notes, but the choke can be used to that same extent to achieve the same result. Now, another way to give your beats a more human feel is to, again, I mentioned velocity, but to go through the MIDI editor and change the velocity manually, even if we make a multi-selective notes, is very time consuming. We can actually apply velocity in a very automated way that makes it easy to vary the loudness of each note as it's struck. So to do that, I'm going to use the hi-hat as an example, and I want you to double tap or double click right on the hi-hat sound that you're working with. Now notice that it brings us into this area that says velocity. So these bars represent the intensity that the notes are struck at, the velocity at which these notes are struck at. So I can come through here, and I can even quickly draw through here and create the illusion that this is a human being, because not every single note is being struck at the exact same loudness. So I'm going to go to the next bar here by using my little options down below, and I'll draw in some velocity curves here. And I'm going to play this back. And if you were to manipulate these even further, some of these, you could get more extreme. And again, notice that the shade of the actual note changes based on the loudness level of the velocity. So there's a trick I like to use where I just kind of pan the hi-hats back and forth, and it creates kind of this illusion of space within the context of the rhythm. And I'll show you what I mean. Now, the velocity, and this in here is automation, so this is all automation occurring. Velocity is just one parameter that we can control using automation. If I select velocity here, you're going to see that there are a lot of options I can control using automation. And you can tell which automations are active because they'll have this little blue dot next to them. So the push-pull, I'm going to actually deactivate this. I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to clear the automation. I don't want to have any extraneous noises happening when I show you how to do this. So I'm going to clear the automation there. I'll click back on the button here, push-pull, and I'm going to the pan option. Now here, all I have to do is just every other note, pan it either left or hard right. That's pretty cool. I like that effect. And it's not as though I'm the only person who uses this. In fact, I'm sure a lot of producers use this effect. I just happen to favor it a lot. So that's how you can have that ping pong panning effect of hi-hats or any sound you want to do by automating the pan. And what's really cool is that these automations are really literally at the sound level. And there are actually automations that can be applied to the track level or to the actual project level too. Now the last thing I'm going to leave you with here is let's apply an effect to this as well. I'm going to click on the effect button here in the drum inspector, and I'm just going to narrow this down to only the Zenbeats plugins. There we are. So delay has an awesome effect. It doesn't introduce any reverberation necessarily, but it still gives you that feeling of space and depth. So what you can do is you can kind of go through the various presets here, and I like the slow delay, so I'm just going to change that to the slow delay, and I'm going to bring down the mix a little bit. And it gives you a really, really neat slapback / ping pong / echoey depth feel. So now we've covered how to add, effects to a specific sound as well. So I hope you found this video helpful. If you have any questions, suggestions, or feedback, I highly encourage you to leave it in the comments area. I'm very interested in hearing what topics are of most value and interest to you. So if you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more appmusic tutorial videos, please consider subscribing. Thanks again for watching, and take care until next time.